one of my neighbors who used to live here and no longer does brought a care package for my 3/4 roommate and me, and of cinnamon rolls. And while I was waiting for him to arrive, I was drawing some car and maybe 8 or 10 bikes that were in the bike corral by front of my house. And there's beautiful chain link fence and a beautiful warehouse behind us, and beauty abounds. And I was using this pen. My most recent pen from eBay is a Waterman Taperite. Now I'm in sort of a Taperite mood these days, and I don't know why. Can I figure that out? Maybe because they're pens that are considered low on everyone's totem pole. But what I did was I put a sack in the pen and I filled it up not with ink, but with sort of dirty water that I soak my pens in. I had this filled up with ink, and then I emptied it and filled it up with this slightly dirty water to get a very dirty, grayed out, sort of bluish gray color, which was kind of nice. It's kind of like drawing with a pencil very lightly. I know that black ink normally comes out of this pen, and by having watered down black ink, it almost feels like it's a pencil. And I'm drawing on very smooth, slightly weird cardstock, which even if I were to draw with black ink, here's black ink, and drawing on this thing, it sort of fades to a grayish color. Let's see if I can find another piece of paper that I can show that. Maybe you can't see that. Yes, you can. It dries a sort of grayish color, and I don't know what is in the paper that causes that to happen. Someone that understands chemistry and physics and paper and ink will be able to explain it to you or to me if you are interested. But I know that there's a certain effect that this paper and this ink and these pens will produce. So what I did was I meant to take a photograph of this first, but hell with it. There it is. Because I'm going to be doing things to this drawing and then adding other things, and I thought I would record the steps by having photographs of it. But I can't do that now, can I? I guess I could use a different phone. Should I do that? Nah. So this is a brush pen filled with water. And what that will do is cause the Waterman ink that's in this pen to bleed a little bit. But because the ink is already sort of watered down, there's not a lot of it happening. But there's a little bit that happens. And you ask yourself, okay, Pierre, what are you trying to convey in your rendering of this scene? And you know, I'm not much of a meaningful artist. My art is more, shall I say, decorative than meaningful. It tends to have less meaning than it is just meant to be a sort of a delight to the eye. I'm not trying to suggest there's some sort of weird message in it that talks about the human condition. Is there? What do you think? So this brush and this, nothing has really changed in this thing yet, but let's try it with this pen. We'll go from Waterman to Wall. Now this is a much more flexible nib. This one, it sort of made me want to draw in very swoopy lines, arcs and stuff, because of the very slickness of the paper and sort of the shape of this car that's made up of all these graceful curves. I don't know what kind of curves they are. And then the bicycles were more staccato. They had, the wheels were round, of course, but the spokes are all straight lines, and the bars and the struts and the whatever they are were sort of straight. So we have this sort of curvy thing versus the straight thing, but they share the simple machine behind. Here we have the straight things being repeated in the chain link fence. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll go in with the darker thing and then go in with the brush on top of that, and we'll just see what happens. So here I'm with just the fully dark. I'm going by memory now, what I remember as being really dark in this picture. This thing was all pretty dark, and of course the shadow under the car was dark, and the shadows cast by the wheels were dark. The sun was coming from over here and casting shadows of the bikes were almost completely flat, meaning the light was coming directly head on, and it sort of was neat. And this was all in shadow from the car. And we had the tail light and the license and the tail light and the tires and not the spokes, but the openings between the tires. And then here, what was on the side of the car were all the reflections of the other warehouse buildings that are in front of my house. So, what does this mean? Kimosabi? I have no idea. But much of my drawing, whether I make it decorative or meaningful or not, much of it is just the fun of driving your pen around the block or taking it out on the highway. Now here I'm on the highway, and when you draw, or when you doodle, I guess, rather than when you're writing something and writing things with meaning and you're thinking about verbs and adjectives, that's remove yourself a little bit from the pleasure of actually writing with the pen or drawing with the pen or seeing what sort of line comes out of this. Sometimes just mark making is what we used to call it in art school, where people, students and faculty and everyone was sort of into the mark rather than the rendering. It wasn't about drawing realistically, it was about that line you made. And that was supposed to be important. And for some people, they mark made very well. And other people, their canvas or paper full of the man-made marks were just as meaningless as any other art that they did, because They weren't very good. I shouldn't say that. That's nasty of me to say. So you can see that black ink has turned bluish gray anyway, even without me watering it down with this. But I'm having fun with this. This is not as much fun as making the swoopy lines with the pen, but I do want to sort of push this ink around. Another thing that's really interesting about this paper, it's sort of coated with something, and the ink, the wetness of this dries really, really fast. It's sort of absorbed into the paper, but it doesn't bleed as it's absorbing. If I put water on the watercolor paper that I was using earlier, the water stays on the surface, and you're able to go back and watch things bleed. Here it dries instantly, which is an interesting effect. So it's quite fun sometimes. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. What's the rest of that jingle? Something Almond Joy's got nuts, Mars don't, because sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. Those are the ski racks or whatever they're called on the top of the thing. I love drawing cars, not because they're cars, that's the least interesting part, but drawing the reflections that the sides of the cars present one is really quite interesting. I love the distortions that you see in a car. I just ruined the drawing. I did not need to do that. Can I save the drawing? Did that help? Probably not. I mean, all of this was relatively dark, especially the back here. This was dark. Okay, Pierre, have you ruined it now? Okay, anyway, the point is, with your pen in your collection, fill it up with ink and do some mark making. Don't write words. Maybe just write a page full of capital B's or some other letter, your favorite letter, whatever it is, and just enjoy the swoop of the pen and the way that it lays down the ink. Maybe it'll seem like those awful piano exercises that you had to do, a million times over to get your fingers lubricated or whatever you're trying to do, loosened up. And there's not much of a melody there or meaning, to go back to that, but there is a value in doing that. Well, I probably completely ruined this, but that's okay. So, have fun with your mark making. I hope you're more successful than I was just now. And then we'll go back to this pen. This is a pen that only Pierre Gustafson would love. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. Yes, this clip is a little bent right there. There's a lot of plating wear on the cap. There's a lot of plating wear on the lever. There's probably some teeth marks and who knows what else going on. The nib is a little bent. All of that is insignificant to the pen's use. If you are one of these pen collectors that opens up the drawer of your pens and you get on your white gloves and you admire the beauty of the manufacturing and the quality of the pen and the condition that it's in after 60, 50, 70, 80, 100 years, this will not make you happy. But if you're a person who puts ink in the pen, puts it in your writing hand and writes with it or draws with it, this pen should give you, it may give you more pleasure or it might give you, the end result might be better than if I use this pen, which is much fancier and has a much more expressive nib on it and everything. But if I had that pen in my hand, I would be distracted by its beauty, I think. And I'd keep on interrupting my creative process by looking at the lovely little basket weave pattern and thinking about who owned this pen before. R.B. McCoy in 1925 was given this pen, and my mind would wander and this would remain unfinished because I'm paying attention too much to the pen. Sometimes pens in your hand that work best are the ones that become invisible. And this one easily becomes invisible because, frankly, Scarlet, I don't give it, frankly, it's kind of ugly or fugly because of its condition. But it's like wearing a pair of old sneakers. Yes, they're ugly, they probably stink, but God, they're comfortable. And if you had to wear a pair of shoes today, would you put on those expensive Italian things that you wear every once in a while, or would you put on those stinky shoes? I have a feeling right now you're all wearing those stinky shoes. I don't know what you're waiting for, wearing your fancy shoes, but the rest of us are wearing our casual stinky shoes. And this is a casual stinky pen. And because of its stinkiness, it's perfect for what I'm doing. Write your answers below. Am I some sort of nut? Don't answer that. Yes, I am some sort of nut. What kind of nut I am? Am I a filbert or a cashew, an almond? Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't. Anyway, what kind of nut do you think I am? Who's going to win the race, the tortoise or the hare? Oh, look at that. That was... Now, why don't you... Okay, the wall starts first. Oh, it stopped. Come on. Sometimes they slide, sometimes they don't. There's a mystery there. Someone else will have to figure that out. Someone from MIT will do studies and figure out what sort of weird gravitational pull is happening on my desk. Bye.